Hi guys, it's Mark Zickrey, writer, producer, director, and creator of Space Command, also known as Mr. Sci-Fi. And this will be the commentary of the first full, complete hour of Space Command out of the 12-hour season. Now, those of you who are investors and are backers on the previous campaigns we've done to raise money to finance Space Command, you'll already have the full hour as downloadable content, and this will be the commentary that will go with that. For those who are just watching this on Mr. Sci-Fi, if you'd like to see the complete hour that I'm talking about, we have a Kickstarter campaign going right now. The link is down there. You can go there. You can order the downloadable first hour, and then you'll get this as well. So, but meantime, I'll give you a little bit of background on Space Command. My wife Elaine and I are, of course, writer, director, producers. The original idea came from me wanting to do a show that would be hopeful and inspiring like the original Star Trek did for me when I was a kid. And also I wanted to do something that the entire family could watch. It wouldn't be a kid's show, but it'd be something that the family could all enjoy. And I think we've succeeded in that. And I reached out to a lot of friends. I've previously written for Star Trek Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5 and Sliders and tons of shows. And so a lot of the actors I'd worked with and knew came aboard and were very gracious. So we'll get into this and I'll talk about it. We started with a Kickstarter campaign, raised $221,000. That allowed us to open our studio and build sets, and I continued raising money selling investment shares for $7,500 each, which you can also do if you want to reach out to me. And 323-363-1259, markzickrey@gmail.com. And that keeps us going. We're shooting, so we've completed the first hour. We're busy at work completing the second hour, which we've shot. We've also shot the third hour, and we're ramping up to shoot the fourth hour. Space Command, as I said, is a 12-hour season, and it's structured as 2-hour stories that split down the middle into 1-hour episodes that then form a larger story over the entire season. So it's really fun. So without further ado, I'm going to turn on my TV and start running the episode, and I'll say what I say as I say it. So here's the remote, and I'm going to push the button now. So if you've got the full hour, you might want to do the same. And also, Dave Edison, our erstwhile editor, is going to be doing a picture-in-picture. So for those of you who are investors and backers. So here we go. Space Command, Hour 1. There we go. It's loading, and there it is. Okay, so it says, stay tuned after the credits for more Space Command surprises. It actually should say, stay tuned after the episode, because the surprises come after that, before the credits, but, c'est la vie. Now, we start with John F. Kennedy as we go from the Himalayas into space. And the reason I did that was when I first conceived of this, my idea was that Kennedy, it would sort of be that we're picking up the vast dream that he envisioned. The notion that we wouldn't just stop at the moon, we continue out to the planets of our solar system and then the stars. And everyone knows the part of his speech that goes, "We choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are difficult, because they are hard." And but this other part of the speech where he's talking about the moon and the planets and climbing the Himalayas and all of that is really cool, and most people don't know that part of it. So I used that quote, and then we had various of our VFX team provide the imagery that went with it. It took quite a while to get that right. Now we're seeing Mira Furlan and Jelena Mirja, who are playing mother and daughter. They're both from the former Yugoslavia, so they both speak the same language. And I love the idea of having characters who don't just speak English in Space Command. So that was very fun. This is Don Bald-Ramos and Ethan McDowell, and the actor on the left is playing Jorge Borges. All of the characters in Space Command, all the characters who are in Space Command, are named after various science fiction writers, except for Captain Parkhill. Captain Parkhill is named after a character in Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. The Martian Chronicles was one of my favorite books, and Ray Bradbury was a good friend and mentor. But Victor Manso plays Jorge Borges, who is of course the great Argentinian fantasist and wonderful writer. So here we have Mira and her daughter. The ship is blowing. It's blowing up. It's coming in off angle. A lot of visual effects people worked on this sequence, starting with Ron Thornton, the Emmy-winning VFX genius of Star Trek: The Next Generation and Babylon 5 and so forth, and on and on. Tobias Richter, you name it, tons of people, and to get it all working. But I wanted to start with literally with a bang. I like to start with an action sequence, something that really puts you into the thick of things. And I had the idea of a ship coming in off angle over the terraformed. Mars is in the process of being terraformed. This starts 60 years from now, so it's burning up because the atmosphere is thicker than it would be on Mars now, but it's not breathable yet, and so it's really fun. And I didn't want to show them in the Paladin at first. I wanted that to be a reveal. So we have this great sequence, great sound design by Dean Hovey and David Bartlett, and music by David Raiklin, and but it's just really fun to see the whole cooling, and then they clamp onto it, and it's just a sequence that I haven't seen before, and I thought it'd be really fun to establish our characters. And again, the fact that Ethan McDowell's character Jack Kemmer, who by the way is named after Ed Kemmer, who starred in Space Patrol in the 50s. He and that's my cameo. There we are. We can see me in my spacesuit. That's the spacesuit my mom got me when I was 12. When Western Costume had a sale, that spacesuit was in the Twilight Zone episode The Parallel. It's also a real Navy high altitude suit from the 50s. Here we've got this great crash landing with everything but the kitchen sink, and I love this sequence. It's great fun, and then we cut back to me going wow, which is perfect for a cameo, I think. And that's that photo of me is on my business card. Tobias Richter did the Martian terrain that we see behind me, and then there's a fellow named Michel up in Canada contacted me. He does title sequences for different TV shows, and he offered to do one for Space Command. He and his team, and so they did this wonderful credit sequence that I really think is terrific, with the rousing score by David Raiklin. And it's really fun that there's a model of the Paladin, and I have a model like that on my office shelf. And then we see our cast members, and many of them we had a talent search for Captain Cameron and Lieutenant Bradbury, and a number of our actors were cast from those casting sessions. People could download the audition sides from anywhere in the world, shoot their own audition, and be considered. We had 1,200 audition tapes come in, and we hired, I think, 9 actors, including Brian McClure as Bradbury, and Ethan McDowell as Captain Kemmer. So here's the credits. I'm sort of the lead dog on Space Command, but Elaine brings a lot of talent and ability and meaning and all sorts of stuff that makes this so much better and so much more deeper and more lasting. This is another VFX shot. There's 900 visual effects shots in this first hour of Space Command, which is an insane amount. A huge episode of Battlestar Galactica might have 200. A big feature might have 1,800 shots, as we do in the 2-hour pilot. So, and this is Brennan Karam did this. He and his brother did some of these. This is the Tobias shot of the monorail. Again, I wrote this full out. I didn't stop myself from writing something that would be extremely challenging to make. And then there we see Mike Harney. Mike is, of course, from Orange is the New Black and A Star is Born and Project Blue Book, and also For All Mankind, Ron Moore's new show. And I've known him for a number of years. That car, by the way, is the car my dad built. It's a replica of a classic car from the 30s. My dad built it by hand. And I know that the sequence looks artificial. It doesn't look completely real, though we've done a lot to make it better with the hair blowing and the reflection in the windshield and so forth. But at the time, my dad's car wasn't running, and before he died, he gave the car to my brother Sean. And I just really wanted this car to be in Space Command, because this is a scene between a father and a son. It's very much based on my relationship with my dad. And I just felt that it was appropriate to have it there. So we put a lot of work in that sequence just to get everything to work, and but it still has a certain quality of artificiality, and in a way that's also kind of charming, because it's almost like a nod back to TV shows and movies, science fiction TV shows and movies of the 50s and 60s, when they had a little more artificiality to what they were doing. but we shot at our own studio. We shot at various locations. The background stuff we actually shot on location. Yeah, it's just, and everyone who's doing this was doing it for a, it's a labor of love. And the issue here, of course, is these are different kind of heroes. Anson, who we see more fully in the prequel audio play and graphic novel that we're doing now. He was a hero, very much a black and white kind of hero, like a hero who sees things in black and white, and there's right and there's wrong, and there's nothing in between. There's no shades of gray. Whereas his son Jack sees a more realistic world, and sees that it's not, cut and dried the way his father sees it. So they have a lot of disagreements. And it was funny because when I'd already cast Ethan as Jack Cameron, I was having lunch with Mike Harney, and I realized, he could play Ethan's dad. They kind of have a certain similar look. And so I said to Mike, want to be in Space Command? He said, sure. So that's how he was cast. And he's terrific, and I plan on working with him a lot more. And the same with Ethan McDowell. Ethan subsequently is going to do Doom Patrol and many other shows and movies, and he's terrific, and we'll be continuing with him. This is a shot of the series Mining Colony, and there we see Doug Jones for the first time. Brennan Karam did that long shot from space, and here we have the synthetics. My idea basically was to have synthetics as sort of a slave class, and to play the notion of, I often write about characters who are invisible, characters who people can do anything to because they don't count, quote unquote, and how we ultimately see them as being the same as ourselves. So liberation, visibility, all of those things are very important to me. And so the idea was to set up Doug. He was sort of the first of his kind, almost sort of like a deluxe iPhone that's sort of gotten demoted to working in the mines. This is Jim Metropole, who's a member of my roundtable. Bob Picardo, of course, from Star Trek Voyager and Stargate Atlantis, etc. He's a wonderful actor, and he saw the Star Trek episode I did with George Takei, and he said to me at a convention that he wanted to work with me. He really liked my work, and so I was looking for a role for him from then on. And again, this is a cave set. At one point when we were building our sets, someone called and they were closing down their studio, and they said, you want to buy a cave set? And so I talked to my brother Jim, who was basically building our sets and working sort of as my warehouse foreman and my shop foreman. And I said, can we use a cave set? He said, sure. And so that's what we did. And all this fire is CG. Obviously, we couldn't set things on fire in our studio. We would have been shut down. But Brennan Karam did a great job, I think, of that, and it really works as a dramatic sequence. The music by David Raiklin is really exciting here, and and again, you see, we basically are starting with characters taking brave actions, selfless actions, and so it starts with Ethan McDowell, Jack Kemmer disobeying the rules. This is the one shot, by the way, where you see the car rolling, and we pushed that from off screen because it wasn't running. It needed a distributor at that point. Now this house, exterior and interior, it was built by the uncle of one of our students, and because we mentor writers and directors and actors and producers, and he had been a set builder and then decided to build his own house, which is gorgeous. It's a work of art, and all he charged us to shoot in his house was one signed copy of the book I wrote with Guillermo del Toro. So I thought that was a great deal. And but again, and we just saw a pan of some photos that those included my mom. It included Robert Heinlein as a teenager, etc. And it was great fun to have those little nods to my past and science fiction's past. Now this is Mike Harney in the flashback, and of course we blacked his hair, and and it was shot during Magic Hour in the back of that wonderful house. And I cast this actor because I just liked the sensitivity of his look to play young Jack, and I think it's a great moment. I love this speech, and then we go back to Ethan, and he says, "You take care of her and your crew," and so, people reading it thought that it was a scene of encouragement, but no, he's basically putting an obligation on his son to not screw things up. So Jack feels very heavily the weight of his father's judgment, and so it's a very bittersweet memory as he's thinking of it, and that's why there are tears in his eyes. But everything, and then we go to the backyard. This is all the same house, and I very much wanted Jack's mom to not be Caucasian. I wanted her to be. I liked the idea of him having an interesting background. Now, whether she's his adoptive mother or his biological mother, we will come to see in days to come. But she's wonderful, and she turns in a wonderful performance here, and as Anoka Chandamal Kemmer. And in the prequel, we get to see how she and Anson met. She was the leader of a worldwide peace movement. She's just won the Nobel Peace Prize after all these years. That's what she's talking about. I love the lighting on this scene. And again, his father is sort of the stern disciplinarian, the unyielding, hard guy to win his, approval. The mother is more Jack's moral compass, and her whole thing is don't follow in your father's footsteps. That's impossible. Follow your own path. But if you just listen to your heart, you'll do okay. So I thought it was very interesting to have those two different voices. And one of the reasons I had the parents in here was because you almost never see the parents of science fiction characters, unless Darth Vader counts. But for instance, Captain Kirk's, until JJ's movie, you hadn't seen Captain Kirk's dad, and you never see them in ongoing relationships. And I thought that would be very interesting. And Space Command follows four families over 150 years. So we see 5 generations of 4 families. So we get to see Jack's dad, Jack's son, Jack's grandson, Jack's great-grandson, etc. And Armin Shimmerman down the road will be playing the grandson of Robert Picardo. So they've had quite a laugh over that. Now we come back to the mine. We've got all the aftermath of the disaster. And again, when you realize how much, our ambitions are so high in Space Command, I think we're pulling off an amazing amount, considering this is done without a studio or a network. Now, Doug Jones, I met when I won the Saturn Award, and at the time I was writing the book with Guillermo del Toro, so we hit it off, and I took him to lunch, and I just thought he was an amazing guy, and I thought it was such a waste with that incredibly sensitive face that you would never see it. He always plays creatures. So I said, look, I'm gonna write a role for you, and we're gonna see your face. I came up with Dor Nevin. And Bill Mumy I'd known since I was 7. I was homesick one day when Lost in Space was on the air, and I pulled out the phone directory and called him, and it was his dad his mom picked up the phone. His dad was listed in the directory, and I went over to his house after I was over my cold, and we've known each other ever since we were that age. So I've worked with him on Babylon 5 and interviewed him for the Twilight Zone Companion, and really wanted him in Space Command. All the actors in Space Command, I love all of their performances. I think everyone's great, and just phenomenal work. I love the idea of having a flashback to this kind of TED Talk where they roll out Doug Jones. And again, I like the idea of his eyes glowing every now and then, but not always. And Bill, again, Bill wanted to be sort of in Nehru jackets, and I thought that was a lot of fun. And also, of course, he wears his hair down in the flashback, and then he wears his hair pulled back for a more severe look when we're, in the modern day, the president of Space Command. And so, but again, it's like, and then we dealt with a lot of challenges in terms of what to have on that stage with the computer readouts and all of that. And the idea that that Dor Nevin is remembering this when he's damaged in the mining accident. Now, Jack, of course, has shown mercy and saved Mira, and now Bob Picardo shows mercy and saves Doug. So these are the 2 parallel lines I'm running until these characters meet. But basically, within the first few minutes, we have 2 of our characters acting with compassion for someone else and saving their lives. And I thought that was meaningful. I thought that was interesting, because for me, compassion defines a hero, and active compassion. Now, again, this is Jim Metropole, a member of my table. He's fun in this. He was actually an actor in shows like Night Gallery many years ago, and also a very famous rock and roll photographer. Now, here we have the larger scene of the synths being burned. And part of this is that when we bought the cave set, the person who we bought it from threw in a pile of silver painted skulls, and I thought, well, I can use those. Now we come to the Space Command base. This is actually the back of our studio, and put in the spaceships and all that stuff. And the guy who's saluting Jack was actually a sentry in the military, so it was perfect role for him. Now we see the Space Command base. We meet Lieutenant Essex, Captain Essex, and played by Sarah Marafino, and all the things you're seeing in the background are added via visual effects. This was shot again in the back of the backyard, essentially the parking lot of our studio. And again, a lot of work went into this over a long period of time, but I'm very pleased with it. And I think, and she was also one of the winners of the worldwide talent search. And essentially, Cadet Bradbury could be a male or female role, but Captain Cameron was a male role. But she auditioned for Captain Cameron. I thought that she was so interesting, and so I applauded her move, coloring outside the lines, and so I had her in for a callback. I really liked what she did, and we cast her. So it's certainly an encouragement to take bold actions, and I also love the fact that she's strong, because I like strong women characters. I like characters who are intelligent and brave and so forth. And it was just very interesting to me to see where her character would lead. And this is the introduction of the Paladin, and there another shot by Brennan. And we see Captain Cameron's ship, and it's that great moment of like, wow. And then we go back to the Ceres mining facility. Ceres, by the way, is a planetoid in the asteroid belt, so I made it into a mining colony. Now here we have some of Bob Picardo's Yusuf Sikandar's possessions, including a copy of The Twilight Zone Companion and some of my science fiction novels by Heinlein, etc., Ray Bradbury. And this is a really touching scene I like very, very much, between Doug Jones and Bob Picardo. Yusuf Sikandar, I like the idea of doing a Muslim character where that's just his spirituality, and he's just a fully rounded character. So the fact he's a Muslim doesn't affect him within the story. It's just an aspect of him, like I'm Jewish or I have friends who are Catholic, etc. In fact, Bob Picardo's Catholic, and he had to ask his priest if it was okay for him to play a Muslim, and he got, dispensation to do so. And then Yusuf Sikandar, who is a Muslim friend of mine, who I named this character after, came, brought his own prayer rug for Bob to use, and also showed him how to pray and on all of that. So it was really really great fun. And this scene is wonderfully done. I love the way they play off each other. I love the Wizard of Oz joke, and there's sadness in it as well. And then I'm basically setting up a lot of characters who need each other to complete themselves in one way or another. And here's his son, Odin, who is going to have some very challenging times ahead. And I love the video call. I love the fact he was in boarding school on Mars. I thought it was, again, kind of Dickensian, but he's such a cute kid. And again, we were very, very lucky to find him. He did a great job. And again, and it was fun because when we shot it, of course, he wasn't on the set for this scene. And so we had Ryan Husk, one of our other actors, doing the lines, and he's an adult. So for a long time, you'd see the scene with this adult voice saying those lines. And when we finally dropped in the holographic representation of Odin, it just was so great to see them all playing off each other. I love this shot with where we see the texture under Dornevin's skin, and all of the stuff with the different tools and so forth, the diagnostics. It's just a terrific job. I'm very pleased. Brennan did that stuff, and I thought he did a great job. And again, and Doug is understands this character, because again, Dornevin. My idea is that humans are sort of pre-programmed evolutionarily to always be looking for, where's the predator, and who's part of our band and who's part of the other band, and all of that. We're still, monkeys in trees, essentially. Whereas Dor, as an android, as a replicant, a synthetic, doesn't have that same evolutionary programming, so he can see things more clearly. And so I make him almost like a conscience of people. This is a bird's eye view shot of the Paladin, and now we're on the Paladin a corridor, and so some of that we built, and some of that is a set extension. And you can see Sarah Marafino again with the smart suits. Here we are down in the Shrike Bay, these two little fighter jet kind of things like Colonial Vipers. And this is actually a design, that's a design by Ron Cobb. Cobb was one of the great designers of Alien and Star Wars and Aliens. He designed the DeLorean time machine, and I'd known him since I was 16, and to get one of his designs was just such a dream come true. Now we're on the bridge of the Paladin, and we meet our crew. And there's a ton of visual effects on this sequence, all the screens, everything. I mean, just tons of stuff you're seeing. It's visual effects, the power core. But again, this is Nathaniel Freeman on the right playing Chilton, who's named after Charles Chilton, the writer of the great British radio show Journey into Space, which I highly recommend. A BBC radio show from the 50s about a trip to the moon and a trip to Mars. And there's Brian McClure, and he plays, of course, Lieutenant Bradbury, named after Ray Bradbury. And then we have, Le Guin after Ursula K. Le Guin, another great science fiction writer, and we have Simak, named after Clifford Simak, another science fiction writer from my childhood and teen years. So this is all because Space Command is a tip of the hat to the science fiction of the 50s, but it's only retro to a certain degree. It's serious, it's modern, it's looking forward to our future. But I wanted to have the aesthetic be the 50s, and I wanted to kind of acknowledge where we have come from. All of the great writers: Heinlein, Asimov, Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, and so I was naming it after them. Then we have this lovely scene where Essex is saying she'll get her own ship, but this crew will follow you into the mouth of hell. And I love where she says it's a pretty big sky. You can't predict what's going to happen. It's a pretty big sky. I just liked that very much. And then again, we're going to have them on this adventure together, but we don't know that yet. And then he kind of tries to ask her out on a date, which is kind of sweet. And, and she blows him off because she has issues. And that was Elaine's line, and I think it's a good line. And but we still have the humor. He's very charming. And Ethan McDowell, I wanted to cast someone who had sort of this American decency, like Gary Cooper or the young Jimmy Stewart or the young Henry Fonda, and not to be corny, but just to be a kind of hero that we don't tend to see much nowadays. And I think and he's exactly like that as a person. He's from Wyoming. He's wonderful, and he's a great guy. And I'm thrilled that we got him. So this is Bob, Yusuf Sikander waking up to find Door has gone. The door opening and closing sound is actually from Journey into Space, because again, a little tip of the hat. Now we have Doug looking down on this vast pit of the mine, and I wrote this monologue for Bob Picardo, for Yusuf, and I didn't. And well, first of all, I have Doug say this line. Chimpanzees could not have done this, not without significant modification, which I think is a very funny joke. I really like that joke. The Detroit joke, by the way, that we just had a few minutes ago, always gets a laugh, and that's another joke that I quite like. But then we have wonderful costumes by Mike Philpott. The headgear that Doug is wearing is a variation from Ian McCaig's design for Dornevan. Ian is the great designer of Darth Maul and Queen Amidala, and many other characters in movies, Thanos in Avengers Endgame and so forth. And Ian's been a friend for over 25 years, and he's my character designer on all my major projects, and so he designed a lot of this. And Mike Philpott is our terrific costume designer, and I love the clothes that both Bob and Doug are wearing here. And then this interesting scene where it's like, where we go into this monologue, and when I wrote it, I didn't know if it would work. And then when we were going to shoot it, and this is on our stage, Bob Picardo said, please shoot this scene early in the morning, because he wanted to really have his focus and his energy strong. And he does, a wonderful job. And I like the lead into it too, where he says, I've seen you pray from the mines. You as I are unlike the rest. And that segues into my wife, Veronique. She was unlike the rest. Now, Veronique, I like to throw in details that are unusual and not, that give you a little bit of mystery. And naming his wife Veronique, you think, well, what's the story there? How did he find her? That's not like a standard Muslim name. And so I liked that. And Veronique, I years ago, they had a screening at Universal when I was a producer there of a miniseries of Moby Dick that had Gregory Peck playing Father Mapple. And he was sitting behind me in the theater, and I struck up a conversation, and he introduced me to his wife Veronique, and that's where I got the name from. But Doug is telling this great story, and I wanted her death, again, to be one of heroism, and so I thought of a flash flood. Elaine and I had been to some of the national parks in years past, and there was always flash flood warnings, and so I went on YouTube, and I looked up flash floods, and I saw what they were like, and I wrote this monologue, and I was willing to cut the monologue if it didn't work. But then Bob started doing it, and in the middle of his monologue outside, a truck started backing up, making that beep, beep, beep sound, but I didn't cut because he was so great, and I knew that we could cut that sound out, and I didn't want to interrupt the flow. And you can just see how great he is in this moment, in this scene, where he's just so overwhelmed, and it's just so raw and so honest and lovely. I mean, he's a terrific artist. He's a terrific actor, and I'm looking forward so much to working more with him. And and then we go to the if I just leapt, and you'd have both been killed. And so again, there's this regret and this sadness to these characters. And Doug has empathy for him in this scene, Dornevan, and so that bonds them as friends. This is a story. This whole story is about friendship and self-sacrifice and empathy, and as I said earlier, compassion. And the idea that Doug's eyes glow when he's processing or feeling strong emotions, and so that's that's how that works. And it's been very difficult to get that effect just right. And but here he says, the family you have is on Mars. We could join him. And I strongly feel that for TV shows to work, you have to create a surrogate family that the audience wants to see week after week after week. On Star Trek, of course, that was Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Sulu, Uhura, Scotty, Chekhov. So we're creating surrogate families here in Space Command as well. That was a great Tobias Richter shot of the Paladin on the exterior. Now we're getting ready for the blast off the launch. And I just thought it'd be super fun to have something that was, again, a callback to the 50s and to When Worlds Collide by George Pal, which has a ship taking off from a track. And it also is reminiscent of a show that I was a big fan of when I was a kid, which was Fireball XL5, which was a marionette show done by Jerry Anderson, the great British series creator. And I worked for him in later years on Space Precinct. I wrote 3 or 4 episodes of that show that had live actors rather than puppets, but it was we'll talk about that sometime. But here's Captain Kemmer telling the story about the sailors and the crew knitting together. And this is, again, very fun because so much in science fiction, they have the Henry V speech where they say, we band of brothers, we few, blah, blah, blah. And it's the inspiring speech, whether it's an Independence Day, today will be our Independence Day, all that stuff. And I thought it'd be very fun to have him do one to satirize that, where he doesn't, where we think he's doing the Henry V speech, and of course that comes from Shakespeare's Henry V, but so they're watching him, and it's supposed to be inspiring, and then ultimately we discover that it's a joke, that he's basically telling them this story to let them know that he's not got a rod up his ass, essentially, that he's that he can laugh at himself, and that he's a good guy, and that he'll be in command, but he's not his father. His father is much harsher, much more severe, much more a disciplinarian. Jack rules in a different way. Jack rules with his humanity and his compassion and his intellect and his courage. And so he's basically letting his crew know who he is in this scene. And the fact that they fell for the joke, it's really fun. And it warms them to him. They like him in this moment. And I love when Dallas Malloy gives that look. And they all do this, kind of like, okay, this guy's okay. He's a bit of a goofball. We'll see how it goes. And then we switch to this great moment, and it's a beautiful shot. I love this shot. Brendan Goose did and made it look really beautiful. And that's basically, Captain's prerogative. And the reason I did this was because I thought it'd be very fun that we started Jack as a pilot on the Thomas Paine, the other ship that we see at the beginning. And so the fun idea of him taking the throttle and him launching the ship for the first time, his ship, it just seemed really, really cool. And I thought it'd be really neat. And I love the fact that he's really good looking, and he's really heroic looking. And he does this scene great. And we have the ship, it's just I find it a very exciting sequence. And the countdown, again, this is something harkening back to the 50s, but I just love this stuff, and I think it's really, really cool. And David Raiklin's music here is very good, and the sound design is really great. And the fact that that little smile, he's got sweat on his face, but he's got that little smile, and then it's zoom, it just takes off. And then the fun part is that we go back to his mother and father watching it, and we see his father, and in that moment we see his father's teary, and we see how much his father loves him. It's like, go baby, go, and that his father would love to be on that ship as well. But you see that when he's not around his son, he can let his guard down and really show how much he loves him, that he does love him. And and this is really fun, this whole thing of flying away from the Earth, and then the moment when they're free of Earth's gravity. And that little release sound is a sound that I when I was a kid, I loved the Disneyland Rocket to the Moon, and I always loved that sound. And so we utilized that sound in our sound design, because the Rocket to the Moon no longer exists. But I wanted, again, a lot of this is tips of the hat to various things in science fiction that have gone before. So this is a Tobias Richter shot. of Marsport. And again, Marsport, that was a place that was in a lot of science fiction that I read as a kid. There's a great science fiction story called I'm in Marsport Without Hilda. There were so many great titles, and that's one of them. And then we get to see Mira, Dr. Von Odara. And I'd worked with Mira on Babylon 5 when I wrote for that show. She was terrific in that show, and I thought someday I'm going to work with her again. I really want to write for her again. And she looks terrific. She's an amazing actress. And this again is utilizing our cave set, but we turned it sideways and ran a red light through it to be Mars, and it has a very different feel. I thought it would be very fun for this to be the new Kyoto section and have Japanese commercials in Japanese on the little view screens, and that was really fun. And then we see synthetics eating in a Japanese restaurant, and the notion of that was that to start to establish that they do have human value and human personalities and wants and desires, and they're not just machines. So then Mira, takes him, walking him toward where she has her surprise, quote unquote. But again, this is a great shot. It looks really good. And the maitre d' of that restaurant, by the way, is a journalist who came to interview us. And I said, how'd you like to be in Space Command? And she had a kimono at home, brought her own wardrobe, which was terrific. And then here's Jack walking along, and we have these great commercials in Japanese. One of our fans in Japan translated them into Japanese and actually read one of them for me. And Kasturi, who is going to be in Space Command later on, she spoke Japanese as well, and so she did some of the female Japanese commercials. And a moment earlier, we saw a fellow walk across the screen, and that was Mike Philpott, our costume designer. And now here we are in the People Mover and voice print identification. That's again a tip of the hat to 2001: A Space Odyssey. You were cleared through voice print identification. And the fun part is there's all these tips of the hat, but for me, the story isn't old hat. I'm drawing from a lot of different things to create a story that's meaningful to me and hopefully to my audience. When Mira talks about Huntington's chorea, that's the disease that killed Woody Guthrie, and it has a high fatality rate. It's a genetic disease. Half of the children of people who have Huntington's chorea get it. So I wanted to have a experimental genetic process that could be done to Dr. Von Odara, and it would give her this ability to heal quickly and not age hardly at all over time. So although the story takes place over 150 years, we have two viewpoint characters. One is Doug Jones, who's a synthetic. The other is Mira Furlan, who again is genetically altered. So this scene of the People Mover, I think, looks really good. I'm really pleased. Overall I'm pleased with the visual effects. A lot of different people worked on them. A lot of different challenges. Again, when I bought that cave set, they threw in these seats, which was from like a diner, and so I used those as well, and then added the People Mover to it. And the People Mover, the idea was that there's a similar kind of People Mover scene in Forbidden Planet, the great movie of the 50s, and then of course Joe Straczynski had a People Mover in Babylon 5, and so again, I'm in a very good tradition. And but though I thought it'd be very fun, because in Star Trek on the Enterprise you have the turbo lift that goes horizontally and vertically, which I've used in Star Trek episodes I've written for. I thought it'd be very fun to have this be a vertical and a horizontal People Mover. So and again, we're on Mars, and I like playing with the color palette. So I like the fact that this is predominantly blue. Then we go to a scene next that's predominantly red and golden. It's just kind of I like intense colors in my work, and science fiction, of course, provides a great opportunity for that. And that's great. And then they rise up, light change, and then all of a sudden they're looking at something amazing, and here we are in the observation balcony on Mars. It's sealed in glass, of course, because the atmosphere is not breathable, and there's this mirage that comes up of an alien city, the Ema city. This is the first thing we see of the Ema, which is a mysterious ancient alien race that we'll come to know a lot more about over the course of the show. And after we had our worldwide talent search, because I like the idea of including the world in Space Command. And so after we did the worldwide talent search, I had a spaceship competition, Lightwave, which is one of those CG modeling programs, sponsored a spaceship contest. Anyone anywhere in the world could design a human-style spaceship, an alien-style spaceship. Ian McCaig, who's our character designer on Space Command, did a preliminary of an alien ship that was sort of this golden ship, whose wings folded and opened up. And it was a cool start, but then Ian had to go off and work on big features, as he does: Harry Potter, Avengers, etc., Guardians of the Galaxy. And so I thought this would be great for someone to take and run with. And the winner was Nicholas Alanis in Italy for the alien ship. So I then hired him. He did an astonishing exterior of the alien ship. So I hired him to do the interior as well, and then hired him to do this city. And because I wanted and the aesthetic is based on Antonin Gaudi, who's a very famous turn of the century Spanish architect. And I actually flew to Barcelona and took copious photos of his buildings, the details of his buildings that we utilized as a design inspiration for our team. And so Nicholas did a great job with the Mirage. And the idea for the Mirage came from Ian McCaig, interestingly enough. Ian worked as a designer on 3 different versions of John Carter of Mars. And one of the ideas in one of the movies that Ian had was the idea of an ancient Martian city that would appear on a dust storm, almost like a mirage on a dust storm. And so since it wasn't used in John Carter, I thought I would use it here. And I'm really pleased that I did. The idea of it's a beacon captain. And again, this is certainly inspired by The Sentinel, which was the story that inspired 2001: A Space Odyssey. The idea of a buried alien artifact. And and the inspiration for this story years ago, I had a friend who, when they were going to do Cowboys and Aliens, I mean, there's a lot of inspirations for Space Command from Space Patrol, the 1950s TV show, tons of stuff. But one friend of mine who was a filmmaker, when Cowboys and Aliens was about to come out, that was a film written by my friends Mark Ferguson and Hawk Ostby, who then went on to create and run The Expanse. He said, if you can do a low-budget science fiction film that we could release at the same time as Cowboys and Aliens, we could do it on a friend's ranch and we could shoot it. So I came up, and I've always loved Blade Runner. It's one of my favorite movies, and I had this idea of a replicant archaeological team that discovers a buried ancient Martian spaceship on Mars and steals it. But it turns out to be a time machine as well as a space machine, and it lands in the Old West, and the Martians come awake, and they're like these monstrous creatures, and so the cowboys and the replicants have to fight off these alien Martians. And it never got made. I kind of wrote it as a premise, nothing more. And then it was, I called it Blade Rancher. That was my joking title. It had a different title. I can't remember at this point. Now here we, of course, are in the Space Command headquarters. That's, of course, Bruce Boxleitner from Babylon 5. And Bill Mumy brought him onto the set and brought him into the show. And Bruce Boxleitner is wonderful in his few scenes here. And Bill Mumy now, of course, he has his hair tied back, and the idea is that he's older now. And of course, here's Jack and Essex, and this is the moment, of course, that the two storylines, the Dornevan storyline and the Jack Cameron storyline, meet right here. Because it was very funny, because when I first released the first 15, 20 minutes, people would say, well, it seems like 2 completely unconnected stories. And I said, well, just wait. Now here we are in the archaeological dig, and Bob Picardo, and it's so fun to have Mira and Jelena, speaking in Serbo-Croatian, because, I think he's flirting with you. It's don't be rude, quiet. What are you talking about? Nothing. And then now Bob Picardo, he had the idea of Yusuf kind of asking Dr. Von Odar if she'd go out on a date. And it was just kind of fun, I thought it was interesting because it was unusual. And the reason Mira turns him down, Von Odar turns him down, we'll come to understand at the end of our 2-hour first story, the pilot. But it'll become very clear why she said no, and it wasn't personal. But now we go to again crawling, finding something, and then bam, they see it. And I really loved the idea that what's buried is not a city, but it's a beacon. It's something that points to something that's buried. And then we see what's buried, and it's this incredible alien spaceship. And again, I wanted something that didn't look like any other ship I'd ever seen. And Nicholas Alanis certainly succeeded in that. And it had to be miles long, because of what Dornevin plans to do with it, what we ultimately see that he's doing. And here it's such a cool scene. Um, and then now here we have the Paladin flying over Mars to try to find Dor and get him. And a lot of people worked on the interior shot, that reverse shot, and it's really fun. We start to meet Greg Mazzy. Greg Mazzy, by the way, is named after someone who I went to elementary school with. The Mazzy Patillo Company. Those are two of my schoolmates, Greg Mazzy and Craig Patillo. And but this is where Mazzy is talking about Dor as a machine, and this is where we start. Jack Cameron saying, well, I think they got a little more humanity than that. I don't think they're just machines. So we're starting to lay that plot, that storyline, because Jack's father said, Jack basically started by disobeying commands and saving Mira and Yelena, an act of conscience that could have cost him his career. And his father then, in the driving scene, says, there's going to come a point where you're going to have to do what's right. You're going to have to sacrifice your career. You're going to have to sacrifice everything. And so the whole journey of this show is to see whether, when Jack reaches that point, what choice he will make. And then we meet Greg Mazzy's son, Alton. And I just thought it was fun to show a troubled relationship between a father and son. Greg Mazzy is essentially, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and all of those guys, Steve Jobs, all wrapped up in one. And there's no lack of ego on his part. My assistant at the time was Mary Jane, so that's why I threw in that line about Mary Jane, who does all the real work. And then, of course, except for the synthetics, of course, and that's again the knife to his kid. He doesn't hold his kid in regard, and his kid has low self-esteem, and so every time his father says anything cruel, it really hurts him because Alton totally is wearing his heart on his sleeve. He has no defenses. He's just trying to win his father's regard, and he dresses in these kind of weird futuristic hipster clothes that look kind of like Alton's wardrobe. The idea is always, well, someone sold him a bill of goods. They told him he looked great in it, and in reality, he's kind of like like a big kid kind of trying on clothes that are Now we get to the incredible interior of the EMA ship, and again, this is Nicholas Solanas' work, and it's just staggeringly beautiful and different, and it's like almost like an alien, Vegas casino. And we had people working on this in all around the world, VFX artists, and again, it's very challenging because it's vast. It has this incredibly deep drop. It's very dangerous. Again, I wanted to create a mysterious space, not like anything we'd ever seen before. And this is also where the lighting, I'm dealing with reds and blues, very intense colors, and that's again very deliberate. This is kind of a spooky place, and that pillar of light. We had interactive lighting, so even before you knew what that pillar would look like, we had the lighting changing from blue to red to green, again to make it more work with the visual effects that we would put in, and it's too much for her. And then there's the question of Doug steps up and says, well, how about me? Can I try it? And she says, yeah, sure, of course. And that's El Sonnet and Coley Mustafa speak as two other synthetics behind Doug, and El Sonnet is going to play a lot. She's going to have a much larger role in the second 2-hour story, Forgiveness. We'll talk about that in days to come as well. But I love this moment, and David Raiklin's score here is really great. It's so eerie and strange, and I love the idea of the alien data going into Doug's mind and it just being overwhelming. It's and again, I think part of this is the EMA, of course, are reminiscent of the Krell in Forbidden Planet in the 50s, and that's inspired a lot of us who've come after. And there's a brain boost in Forbidden Planet that's too much for most humans to stand. It'll kill you if you try. And so that was sort of the idea of like this brain boost that humans can't endure, but Doug, being more than human, can. But at this moment, this is sort of like, is he evil? Is he going to be evil? We don't know. He's just struck Yusuf Sikander and disabled the other synthetics, so it looks like he's going to be really bad. Now that bridge, that physical bridge, the patterning on those two data screens there came from a Gaudi, a door that I saw that I took photographs of in Spain, that Gaudi designed, and that walkway we we designed that, we built that. That's physical. So I always like to have something physical, not just CG. And like the Paladin set is entirely a physical set. And here's a sequence from Tobias Richter where we see the ship emerge, and again it's everything's cracking. I wanted this to be a really cool, big, mysterious scene, and I didn't want I I designed the script so that Elaine and I wrote it together, but I kind of worked out sort of the twists and turns of it, and it was like I wanted it to be a series of surprises throughout this story, and I wanted there to be these moments of like, wow, just like, holy cow. And again, if you look at the scale of this, it's much bigger than most science fiction shows. I can't think of another science fiction show that has this much stuff in an hour, but this is, the alien ship is huge. And this is where you really see how big it is next to the Paladin, because this is just, and then finally now you see it in full. And it's just incredible. And then that great staccato sound, and then the thing whirs and takes off. And it's almost like a steampunk design. It's so unusual, and I love the texturing on it, the detail on it. It's just great. And then there's this wonderful Tobias Richter shot and the rack focus. I love that. And then there's this Tobias Richter shot where the Paladin just takes off after it. And again, you can see how many different color palettes, because that ship's golden against the blue of those clouds in space. And but now we're really on the run. We're chasing this thing, and where's it going? We don't know where it's going. And this is really dramatic, and we've brought our two storylines together fully now, because all the characters are on those two ships. And Nathaniel Freeman plays Chilton, and he's sort of the chief engineer, sort of the Scotty character, more or less. And I very much wanted to have a lot of ethnic and cultural diversity in Space Command. We're going to have more as we go forward, but that was something I was very, very aware of, and something that Star Trek, of course, was the first show to really do that and do it well. So this is the Templar and the Paladin, so it's really fun. And you see that Essex's ship has a different color palette, which is fun. And she's and her crew is has a different kind of constituency. And here's Doug, Dornevan, and he's controlling this ship, and where is he headed, and what is he doing, and it's so alien, and yipes. And initially, when we first screened the completed first hour, we stopped here on this cliffhanger with Captain Cameron wondering what the future is going to be. But I wanted to continue to finish the full hour, and so that's where we continued, having Yusuf Sikander wake up on the alien ship, and this is again about people becoming friends and caring about each other, because in reality, Dr. Von Odara is his employer, and that's her daughter, and yet they really are compassionate people. They're not just in it for themselves. And the fun part is that I have Mira's character be sympathetic to Doug Jones pretty much from the first, and whereas her daughter's always kind of like, let's get out of here, we got to stop this guy. And again, I love this scene where we're seeing the alien ship and we're seeing the screens, and yet it's all about the human characters. And again, this is where science fiction needs to be about the human story. This is a story of, have you prayed yet? It's like I'm not taken over by aliens. It's this wonderful speech where we see that Doug is himself, and he has some agenda, but we don't know what that is. And but he just seized an opportunity, and he had to act quickly. And so, because the whole idea is that he's the only one without an inhibitor chip, the only synthetic, the only one who can act with free will until he starts freeing the other ones. And they're with me now. So these are the first two that he frees. He gives them free will. So with you to do what? It's like, what, and it's like, and then he starts talking about, what his plan is, obliquely what his plan is. And he needs time. That's why he's taking the hostages. It's I love having intelligent characters. There's, Damon Knight created something called the Idiot Plot, and Damon Knight was one of my teachers at the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop, and he bought my first short story for an anthology, and he also wrote the short story To Serve Man that was made into a great Twilight Zone, and he coined the idea of the Idiot Plot, which is a plot that only works if everyone in it is an idiot. And so I try as hard as I can to avoid writing that plot. And so I try to have everything stem from character, everything stem from logical progression. And so now Yusuf realizes that he's no longer on Mars, and that his son is essentially alone. And so, and he doesn't know what's going to happen. And so he says, at least let me call him. And so then again, we have Doug, we have Dornevin be compassionate. He says, okay, I'll let you call him, but don't reveal anything that can be used against us. So again, even though it's a hostage situation and they're adversarial, there's still a connection. There's still a kind of a quality of friendship there, despite everything. And then once again, we have, Yusuf talking to his son, and the son is a sad little waif because he's both his parents have, abandoned him more or less, and yet we're dealing with the issue of what's the right choice, and sometimes there's no good choice, so you just choose the better of bad options. And in this case, he's saying, go stay with Mrs. McCluskey. And again, when I came up with that line, I like to name characters names that sound real, and Mrs. McCluskey just sounded like a neighbor. You'd have a neighbor named Mrs. McCluskey. I don't know, I've never known anyone with that name, it just came to me. But Dornevin is the name that came to me. Yusuf Sikander, of course, was a friend. Vana Odara, I just like that name. Yelena, I named after the actress, Yelena. And, so it just kind of, I come up with stuff and just, see, I kind of play with it until it feels right. And, and then she says, what's that proof? That you're out of your mind, and then Vaughn says, no, they're moons. They're moons. They're locations on Titan. And then I'm also thinking, and the fun part also about science fiction is you don't just create a story and characters, you create a world, a universe. And I love that because you can take a left turn and suddenly there's a whole new story and a whole new set of characters that you can explore. It's rich with Star Wars, Star Trek, all of those have such rich tapestries and possibilities. So again, it's like, why are you going to Titan? And don't touch anything, because sometimes machines are, it sounds like it's alive. But the point being that he's going to Titan, and we set up during the newscast when Ethan's back home with his parents, Jack, that there's the British have a colony on Titan, and there's an insurgency, there's a rebel insurgency, and we're going to be starting to deal with colonial moons of the outer solar system and rebel insurgencies and so forth, and combat synthetics, of course. And that's why we had Mazzy talk about can synthetics hurt people? Well, with the exception of the combat models, no. Well, the combat models can hurt people, and we're going to see that happen again. Here we are, in the corridors of Paladin, and again, we're playing multiple lines, like it's like sons and fathers. This is very much about sons and fathers, this story. So it's Jack and his troubled relationship with his father. It's Alton and his troubled relationship with his father, Greg Mazzy. It's Dornevin, who's sort of a son to Mazzy as well, and a rebellious son. And then there's also Yelena and her child, and their relationship, and so forth. So we're playing all of those multiple layers, about parents and children. And it's great fun. And then here's the captain's ready room. You can see HAL 9000 in the upper right there. And again, it's always the question with these sets of getting the most bang for our buck and putting in video screens, data screens, and so forth. And then I like the blue lighting in this as well. It's just kind of fun to see. And I really like these confrontational scenes where it's basically Jack's getting angry at Mazzy. It's like, what's the real story here? What he needs a way to deal with this. He needs more information. And finally, Mazzy talks about it. And this is the first scene really where Mazzy comes clean about what's going on and the fact that he's dying. Now, we've planted that earlier on where we see him kind of, come on, Dad, sit down, see how they pamper me. He's trying to pretend that he's not ill when he is. But in this scene, he gets over excited, and, he can't hide it anymore. And then he has to admit that he's dying. And that brings another layer another interesting layer to someone at the end of their life and having to face their own mortality. And particularly with Bill Mummy, it's very fun because, we've seen Bill grow up on camera. He was in Twilight Zone when he was a little kid, in such great episodes as It's a Good Life, and In Praise of Pip, and then Will Robinson on Lost in Space, and then Babylon 5 and so forth. So he's he's like a member of our family, and knowing him personally over all those years has been such a great honor. So it was really, with all of these actors, a lot of the actors who we love in from different science fiction shows, you'll see them in guest starring roles in TV shows now, and it's usually just a little throwaway thing. They don't get to do anything. Maybe they're the comic relief or whatever. And I wanted to give all of these characters meaningful moments. I wanted to make them rounded characters. And so to have Greg Mazzy, we see him, he has a son, he has, what he's proud of having done with his life, these synthetics. We have him in relationship, we have him in his work life and his personal life. He's dying, he's dealing with that. We see what kind of guy he is. And then we have Jack saying, well, are you, and then Jack brings up the notion of, Dornevan as Mazzy's son in a way, and Mazzy's not gonna have that at all. So, and you can see the Templar through that window, because the Templar is keeping pace with the Paladins. That's Essex's ship that you see in that porthole. And then we have this little scene where Jack tries to advise Alton and say, don't, be careful of what you're trying to win your father's affection. It can be a trap. It can destroy you. And Alton is not open to hearing it. This is a scene that Elaine wrote, and she suggested it to me, because I thought, yeah, I think that's really cool. The notion that he's a character who, we see him as someone who, if Jack were weaker, Jack might have turned out like Alton, that Alton doesn't have enough backbone. And I thought that was interesting. Again, these parallels or near parallels. And then that was a great shot of the Paladin, the Templar following. And here's Cody Mustafa speak. He actually auditioned for Kemmer, and for Jack Kemmer in the Worldwide Talent Search, and we cast him as one of the synthetics, and he did a great job here too. And I just love this whole thing with Doug, with Dornevan. Just you see him always trying to figure out what's going to work, what's going to give him more time, what's going to allow him that opportunity. He knows he's fighting a losing battle, and he's trying to win a losing battle. And also another thing I did that was really fun is the idea that he doesn't know all of the capabilities of that ship. He's learning it. He got the brain boost, but it's taking time for him to know how much that ship is capable of. And I thought it'd be very fun to have that as an ongoing thing that grows and isn't just, he doesn't know it all from the first. Again, that racking focus is great fun on the Paladin, and where you've got someone behind Jack, someone in front of Jack. My brother Jim designed this set and built it, and we had Carlos Fernandez as our designer, designing a lot of the sets, including the mining set and so forth. And he did a number of spaceship interiors, and so it was inspired by that. But Jim then took it and brought it all together. This scene on Titan, AJ Wedding oversaw this. He's a friend of mine who's a director and VFX guy, and he did the visual effects in this sequence, and we shot second unit with the synthetics, and that's my moment. There I am in my spacesuit being disintegrated, the grizzled space jockey, and I'm actually going to write a short story that brings together that cameo at the beginning and this cameo as a continuing character, the idea that it's the same guy. And then I love the fact that the synthetics all stop, and then there's the ship overhead, and then Doug appears. And there was always the question of, okay, how do we do that? And I thought these portals that open up and Doug emerges and steps through would be great fun. And that's Kasturi there on the middle of the camera there a moment ago. And he says, I have other uses for your army, and that's on Titan. And the idea is that Titan has an atmosphere, so you can't breathe the atmosphere, but it has an atmospheric pressure. This is the coming attraction spot for hour 2. Brendan Karam did these effects, and I really like them a lot. And but it's fun because, again, this was preliminary before we'd finished hour 2, so a lot of these shots will look very different in the final, and because this was done early on. And but again, this is setting up the dilemma for the second hour. And I've written the first 8 hours of Space Command, and also outlined hours 9 through 12. We've written the novel. We've written Maya Bonhoeff's written the novel, and I've written the prequel, which is a graphic novel and an audio play. So I know a lot of where the story goes, where it's come from and where it goes. And then it goes beyond that, of course. That's just the first season of the show. So then we have the first trailer. And then I was thinking, what else could I add? And I thought, whoa, it'd be fun. It'd be very, very fun to show some more hours of Space Command in terms of the extras. And so I did extras of the hour of Forgiveness, which is the second 2 hour story. So we had a trailer from that. We had a trailer from Great Solar War, which is the third 2 hour story of the first season. And so I included trailers of that, and then I threw in a sequence with Angelique Scott, who's going to play Delaney Chilton, Lieutenant Delaney Chilton, who is the daughter of Charlie Chilton, Charles Chilton, who Nathaniel Freeman plays, the chief engineer on the Paladin. And the credits, of course, show our Kickstarter backers, our investors, all these amazing people, thousands of people who've helped us get Space Command to work, and I'm very grateful to all of them. And it's been an amazing journey. It's taken a long time. We're continuing forward, but I don't regret it at all. It's been challenging, but I like challenges, and to be able to work with Ian McCaig and Ron Cobb and these wonderful actors and these wonderful artists and everyone up and down the line, our camera crew and our everyone in pre-production, production, and post. It's been a dream come true. I'm living the life that I want to be living, and it's very fun with Space Command because I write it, I cast it, I shoot it. I don't have to ask permission, and fortunately I'm the same as my audience, and so because I'm the same as them, if I think something is fun, I'm usually right that my audience will think it's fun too, and we have a lot more to go with the second hour, and onward, all 12 hours then beyond, but you're going to be there for the ride, and I'm glad that we could share this time together, and and you could be part of Space Command as I have been. That's sort of it for now. As I mentioned, we're running the Kickstarter campaign. We're running all of these different ways of getting money, Space Command shares. Now, if you're watching this now, I guess it was after the credits, the additional trailers, and because I see myself at Barnes & Noble, the science fiction and fantasy section, saying, hey, we have some extras for you. So let me walk you through a little bit of a commentary on these extras as well, for those of you who've gotten them. And so essentially, because ongoingly with Space Command, I pull together bits and pieces and then weave them together into the larger stories, and it's very much flying by the seat of our pants, and very unlike every other show I've written for, other than World Enough in Time, the Star Trek episode. Everything else was with the studio and a network. So now this is a trailer for Forgiveness. We start with this incredibly cute baby that'll grow up to be Jack's son Ed, who will be in Great Solar War as an adult, and this is a scene in Forgiveness where Jack talks about Essex leaving on some mission and not telling him, and the baby was left with his child, and Essex's child was left with her guardian growing up, and it's Nichelle Nichols. Now, when I was 10, Nichelle was kind enough to have me over to her place and give me a signed copy of her own Star Trek script and a signed photo, and it was an amazing experience, one of the great experiences of my childhood. And so as I ran into her in more recent years, I really wanted to work with her, and thank God we were able to. I cast Ferran Tahir, who was the Federation captain in JJ's Star Trek, who gets killed by the Romulans at the beginning. He's also an Iron Man, tons of other stuff. And I cast him because, again, I wanted characters who were not just Caucasians. James Hong, of course, is the great actor from Blade Runner and Big Trouble in Little China and Chinatown and hundreds of films and TV shows. And so the second episode, the second story, Forgiveness, continues the story that we set up in Redemption, but it takes place 3 years later, and it's a very different story from the first story, even though it connects and builds upon it. So Ferran Tahir plays Kasain the Conqueror, and we introduce some new characters, and John Hennigan, who's a well-known wrestler, is in it as well as a combat synthetic, and he's terrific. And we shot the third hour, and we're about to shoot the fourth hour of Forgiveness, and we'll be bringing these cast members back. And our stunt choreographer Steve Huff did a great job, and that there's an alien ship that you see in this trailer, this sort of this insectoid ship, and that was another winner of the alien spaceship contest that we had with Lightwave. And then Ian designed the little thing that you see on Kassane's face. He likes the idea of facial tattoos and facial marks, as exemplified by Darth Maul, whom he also designed. And then we go into the trailer for Great Solar War, which is the third 2-hour story. Now, Great Solar War, it was fun. We actually open with the opening of that episode where we see Jack Hemmer having nightmares, where Essex is continually in different kinds of danger, and then he wakes up, and he realizes all of these are dreams. But then we have the big surprise, which is he wakes up, and you'll see this if you're watching this along with me. You'll see he wakes up. We shot this at Brendan Karam's house. Brendan Karam is one of our visual effects guys who did the visual effects in this trailer. And then we see that Jack is 20 years older, and his son is in danger. And this is sort of the opening of Great Solar War, because we've continued with our characters over a 20 year period. It's 23 years after the first 2-hour story, because as I said, Space Command covers 150 years, and we jump back and forth between the generations. And so this is a big space war story. And then finally we have this little featurette I did with Angelique Scott. And again, I like to be open to what the world brings to me. And so Nathaniel Freeman's a member of the roundtable that I run, and one day he showed up and his hair and beard were white. And he said, he actually went gray very young, and he dyes it black for roles, but that's his natural color. And I realized, well, gee, we could have him play Angelique Scott's father, and I could create a character, Delaney Chilton, because I was going to have Angelique in it, but I thought, oh, well, the moment he showed up, it's like, Angelique's a member of my table too, and I thought, oh, they could play father and daughter, and having his hair black in the early episodes, and then white in Great Solar War, which is 23 years later. And so I did this little featurette where Elaine wrote this scene between father and daughter, and then I thought of this framing story around the scene that you could utilize bits and pieces that we had, and just be inventive. So, for instance, when we recorded the radio play, the prequel, the Space Command prequel, after we shot this scene, Mike Harney was there, and so we put Mike Harney and Nathaniel Freeman against a green screen, and then dropped in a background and so forth. So there are a lot of tricks involved. This again is another house that another Space Command fan aficionado let us utilize for this scene. And later that night, Elaine shot a different scene for one of her features as a sample scene from one of her features. So again, we utilize everything we can, everything we have. And David Bartlett was our DP on this scene. And again, I had Mike Philpott make the uniform slightly different, so that the buckles are gold, the insignia is gold instead of silver. So it's a slight, because this is years later. And then we had the background photo. My friend Nick Roberts did these background photos of Nathaniel as a cop, Nathaniel in the war. And so that gave me, kind of helped to flesh out the backstory of him being a cop, him being in the war, him flying with Anson. And so as a result, I was able to deepen his backstory and then lead to Angelique's, Delaney Chilton's story. And Delaney, of course, is named after Samuel R. Delaney, one of my teachers at Clarion, the great science fiction writer. When I was 19, I went to the Clarion Writers Workshop, which is the leading science fiction workshop in the country. And 6 weeks, each week, a different famous science fiction writers lives with 25 students. At the time, it was in the dorms at Michigan State University, and we would write like crazy. And many famous writers have come out of that workshop. Just from the year I was there, Kim Stanley Robinson and Robert Crace were two of the students. They subsequently became very famous science fiction and mystery writers, respectively. And I sold my first short story to Damon Knight and Samuel Delaney. Chip Delaney was one of our teachers as well. So that's why I named her Delaney, and I like the name. And then there's this scene of forgiveness, of compassion, and I really like the humanity of our show. I just like that there's so much you see of these characters where they're people, they're in lives, because science fiction characters, or characters generally in TV and movies, often they don't have parents, they don't have families, they don't have friends, and I wanted to change that. And this time we'll be together, and so this will lead directly into Great Solar War, and that will be extremely fun. So that's the first hour of Space Command, and we're headed to to great things. So thank you for being my friends during this wonderful audio commentary. There'll be lots more to come, and we'll talk to you real soon. Take care, guys. Bye.